I'm here with Adam Tolmach from the Ojai Vineyard. When I was asked to do this presentation for A7, I came up with the bright idea to showcase the two stars that really make this happen, and that's the vineyard and the winemaker. So here we are in Block ZA at Nacido Vineyards. Block ZA was planted in 1991. You got part of the first crop in 1994.
Yes.
We meaning the Miller family back then, had the great idea to plant it 9.6 by 6.6 feet. Don't ask me why, only they know. The clone is Estrella, which we also call the Bien Nacido clone, because it seems to manifest itself differently for some reason versus other Estrella clones planted throughout the state. And the rootstock is 5BB. What was it like, that first vintage, with Syrah being such a kind of a new thing in California, especially in cool climate viticulture, California? What was it like in the early days?
Well, I think really Bob Lindquist was the one who was the came up with the original idea that Syrah really should be planted in a cooler spot, and so he actually had the Millers graft over, I believe it was Gewürztraminer back in X block, and the first crop there was 1987, I believe. And so I just remember tasting that wine out of barrel back then, and just being astounded at how much it tasted like Côte Rôtie from the Rhône Valley in France.
It gave you hope, and a lot of other vintners hope, that Syrah could be something special here in California.
Right, and I mean that's I think the northern Rhône in France is where that's where the inspiration for Syrah is, because there it's a wine that's a wine of great complexity and spiciness and exoticness, and goes sort of beyond the generous fruit quality that we always get here in California. What was amazing about Bien Nacido Vineyard Z Block from the very beginning was, there were a lot of unknowns. We came to the vineyard and saw what was there. It seemed to produce a reasonable sized crop. But what was incredible was the fruit came in so late. I mean, we were talking about November for harvest date, early November typically, and it really freaked us out and made us very worried about whether we could get the ripeness that we were looking for. There was a bit of variable ripeness in the fruit. There was greener fruit, so we definitely went through and thinned things. But still, even with thinning and trying to do a really good job in the vineyard, we were still typically first week in November, and we're pushing up against rain and other worries. But every year, the fruit turned into something completely amazing, complex, exotic, and delicious. The thing about Syrah here, there's no lack of character, and when I started working with this block, I really had the philosophy that you had to extract absolutely all you could out of those grape skins, and so for me that meant 3 punch downs a day at 8-hour intervals, very long macerations, and we ended up with pretty astounding wines that were relatively undrinkable for the first decade or so of their life, but then once that decade had passed, they were pretty amazing things to drink. I found at this spot really a little shorter maceration because there are strong tannins here, and a little more delicate extraction of the fruit, thus less punch downs. has given me a more aromatic and more supple wine that I think is in better balance.
What is it about having kind of that dappled sunlight versus the direct sun that attracts you?
Well, yeah, in not just this vineyard, but in a number of vineyards, what I've discovered with vertical shoot positioning is you have this very narrow canopy, and you can end up with too much sunlight on the fruit. And what I found is where an extreme job was done, where the canopy is super narrow and there's been leaf pulling in the fruit zone, that the wines tend to come out excessively tannic. I also found that they tend to be very fruit filled, but not very perfumed, not very spicy, and so I found that doing a little less on a vertical shoot positioning setup works out better. Thus, leaving a leaf or two on the lateral near the fruit zone. It's been an evolution because I really believe that winemaking is a craft, and you try to learn every year something new and try to apply some of that knowledge as you go along. And so, as far as the harvest decision goes, during the 90s, I think we were picking a little riper than we pick now. I mean, we were kind of aiming more at that 24 and a half bricks area, and then in a warm vintage it would push up to 25 or higher. And I found that by picking a little less ripe, now we're aiming more like 23 perhaps, that at that number we have higher acidity, which isn't so much an issue, but more the flavor profile is more where I want it, which is I want that zesty pepperiness that Syrah possesses, and as it gets towards uber ripeness, you lose the distinctiveness of Syrah. Well, in a nutshell, we bring the fruit in. I've talked about ripeness, and in the past, the fruit was 100% destemmed. We've gone to more whole clusters in the ferments, and so we don't use a lot. Probably 15% might be a typical average of how many whole clusters we use in the ferments. They go into small open-top fermenters, stainless steel, typically 3.5 tons, and we go for a 4 to 7 day cold maceration before fermentation. And then we really encourage a pretty hot fermentation after that. We like to see it, the cap temperature up to the mid 90s, juice temperature in the 80s, high 80s, and then in the years past we would leave the juice with the skins for quite a long time. That's shortened up now. Now we're really in the more 10 to 14 day time period, and that's really been in reaction to the high tannins we have at this vineyard site. And then after we press off the fruit, it goes into a stainless tank overnight, and then down into barrel. As far as the sulfur regime, prior to fermentation, we've gotten it down now to about 13, 14 parts per million added, total added prior to fermentation, so just really a drop. And then post-fermentation, we don't really do anything at all. The wine goes through malolactic sometime between the winter and the late spring. In July, typically, we will rack the wine off of the lees, and that'll be its only racking. At that time, we add 22 parts per million SO2, and then it's typically the wine is bottled someplace 15 to 24 months after harvest. And at that time, if everything's gone well, it's bottled without fining or filtration, and at that time we adjust the free SO2 to right about 20 parts per million for bottling.